There was a time when you didn't need LinkedIn to know who the most powerful man in the room was. You didn't need a job title. You didn't need a business card. All you needed was 30 seconds in an elevator. Because in the 80s and 90s, before anyone was talking about personal branding, men were already doing it, with a single spray every single morning. Walk into that boardroom, sit down at that table, shake that hand, and before you said a word, people already knew two things about you: how much money was in that account, and how much confidence was in that walk. Cologne wasn't an accessory back then. It was armor. It was a signature. It was the last thing you put on before you walked out the door to go build an empire, and the first thing people remembered about you after you left the room. Today, we're counting down 6 fragrances that didn't just smell expensive. They built reputations. They closed deals. They made men unforgettable. And by the time we get to number 1, you'll understand why. Decades later, grown men still talk about this bottle like it's an old friend. We start with the one that broke all the rules. By the late 80s, most men's colognes were still playing it safe: clean, fresh, forgettable. Then German fashion house Joop did the opposite of safe. They built a fragrance around tobacco, honey, cinnamon, and warm vetiver, an amber fougere so rich, so loud, it practically walked into the room before you did. Joop Homme wasn't a cologne for the man who wanted to blend in. It was for the man who'd already decided he wasn't going to. One spray in a crowded elevator, and by the time the doors opened, everybody in that box already knew somebody important had just arrived. Critics called it too much. The men who wore it called it exactly enough. And that's the whole story of Joop Homme, a fragrance that didn't ask for attention. By the time the 90s were closing out, the boardroom itself was changing. Power dressing was still king, but a new kind of executive was climbing the ladder. Sharper, cleaner, more calculated, less look at me, more watch what I do next. That's exactly the energy perfumers Annick Minardo and Christian Dussolier bottled with Boss Bottled. It opens with apple and plum, bright, almost disarming, before settling into cinnamon, geranium, and warm, grounded woods. It smelled like a man who had just walked out of a negotiation, having gotten exactly what he came for, and was already 3 steps ahead, thinking about the next one. Here's what makes Boss Bottled different from almost everything else on this list. It never went away. To this day, it remains one of the best-selling men's fragrances on the planet. That's not nostalgia keeping it alive. That's staying power, the same quality it was built to represent in the first place. If Joop Homme was loud confidence, Drakkar Noir was something colder, controlled intensity. Sharp lavender up top, dry woods underneath, built on that classic aromatic fougere structure that defined an entire generation of masculine fragrance. This wasn't a bottle you wore to be noticed in the moment. This was a bottle you wore to be remembered after you'd already left. Drakkar Noir sat on office desks and bathroom counters across the country for the better part of 2 decades, not because it was trendy, but because it worked. It became shorthand. If you knew, you knew, and for the men who wore it, that quiet recognition was worth more than any amount of noise. Chanel doesn't do loud. Chanel has never needed to. Égoïste is exactly what its name promises: self-assured, unbothered, completely indifferent to what anyone else in the room is wearing. Rich sandalwood, warm spice, and a structure so distinctive that even Chanel itself has described it as conservative on the surface, daring underneath. That contradiction is the entire point. This wasn't a fragrance for the man trying to climb to the top of the company. This was for the man who was already there, the one who didn't need to prove a single thing to anyone sitting across that boardroom table, because everyone at that table already knew exactly who he was. Chanel Égoiste didn't announce power, it confirmed it. If you're enjoying this walk down memory lane, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I've got a lot more of these deep dives coming, and trust me, the next 2 on this list are the ones that actually built the entire industry we know today. All right, let's get back into it. Cool Water didn't just launch a fragrance, it launched an entire category. Before 1988, men's fragrance was mostly built around warmth, spice, wood, leather, amber. Then Davidoff released something fresh, clean, and aquatic, and the entire industry pivoted around it. Cool Water is credited with kickstarting the fresh fougere wave that would go on to dominate men's fragrance for the next 2 decades. Nearly every clean, ocean-inspired cologne that came after it, you can trace the DNA straight back to this bottle. Here's the real measure of its impact. Even men who know absolutely nothing about fragrance can recognize this one on sight. Not because of clever marketing, because it became part of the culture itself. That's not a trend, that's a legacy. And 30+ years later, it's still one of the best-selling men's fragrances in the world. And here it is, number 1. The fragrance that didn't just walk into the boardroom. It owned it the moment it entered. Dior Fahrenheit is unlike anything else on this entire list. Bold, leathery, almost dangerous, built around a violet leaf note and a rare, unusual accord that Dior has never quite recreated the same way since. It was polarizing from the day it launched. Some men loved it instantly, others couldn't stand it. But nobody was neutral about Dior Fahrenheit, and that's exactly why it earned this spot. Because the most powerful men in that era were trying to be liked by everyone in the room. They were trying to be remembered by everyone in the room. Fahrenheit didn't ask for approval. It demanded a reaction. And decades later, fragrance historians still consider it one of the most daring, most fearless launches in Dior's entire history. If you wore Fahrenheit in the 90s, people didn't just notice you walk in. They remembered exactly who you were, long after you'd walked out. 6 fragrances. One unforgettable era. And every single one of them still tells the same story. About confidence, about power, and about men who understood something a lot of guys have forgotten today. You don't have to say a word to make an impression. Sometimes, all it takes is walking into the room. So tell me, which one of these did you wear back in the day? Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if you want more deep dives into the fragrances that built legacies, hit that subscribe button right now.